On August 26th of 2021, Marion Frieswick died about 3 weeks short of her 100th birthday. At the time of her death, she had become the face of women cartographers at the Office of Strategic Services. Now, in this paper, I'm not formulating a statement, an argument, or doing a deep analysis. I am simply going to tell the story of some of the people at the map division of the OSS and what they did and how they functioned at a challenging time, namely World War II. To most people today, the OSS is a World War II intelligence agency, which is correct, but the only women that they are familiar with or have heard of were spies or perhaps code breakers, thanks to some current popular books that are out there. But the agency was a major producer of maps that were used at meetings by Roosevelt and Churchill, and by the Joint Army-Navy Intelligence Studies, JANIS, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. OSS reported directly to the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the reports contained maps. Many of these maps were made by women. Okay. According to Trevor Barnes, who's done quite a bit on the OSS, the map division during the war answered 50,000 requests for map information, distributed more than 5 million intelligence maps, provided the cartography for 4 Roosevelt-Churchill summits, produced 8,200 new maps, and collected and cataloged 1.7 million maps, which was the largest catalog map collection in the world, and the catalog was on 3x5 cards, typed, no computers. Okay. Barnes noted that if wars are fought as much by maps as by weapons, the OSS map division was the epicenter of the battle. The Office of Strategic Services was instituted by President Roosevelt in July 1941 as the Coordinator of Information, the COI, with William Wild Bill Donovan, who was a decorated veteran of World War I, as its director. The agency was reorganized and renamed OSS in June 13, 1942, after Pearl Harbor. Richard Hartshorne, a well-known geographer of the time, was made head of the Projects Division, which was essentially a geography division. On a serendipitous trip to Ohio by Hartshorne in the fall of 1941, he actually had stopped in to visit a friend overnight. But when he visited, he met Arthur Robinson, who I think most of you have heard of. Robinson at that time was a 26-year-old geography graduate student who was just beginning his PhD with a focus on population. But he had made maps for other faculty, especially for Roderick Petey, and the map of Italy that we see here is one of Robinson's maps that was in a book by Petey. And Hartshorne was impressed by him. So he was hired in October of 1941, and in 1943, following a reorganization, he was made the chief of a new separate map division. The map division was divided into 4 sections: cartography, map intelligence, topographic models, and special photography. And Robinson stated 3 overall goals for the division. First was procurement and maintenance of a collection containing comprehensive intelligence and reference foreign map coverage. Second was the preparation of map research and analysis studies pointed toward the evaluation and use of maps in the field of intelligence. And third, the preparation of the maps required for the fulfillment of the intelligence functions of the branch. The cartography section produced maps for strategic purposes, not tactical use. They weren't used by soldiers in the field. The map information section collected new cartographic material of all types, and do picture that with quotations, because at the time, not only OSS, but also the Army Map Service had put out pleas to people to donate maps that they might have of areas, because we were caught so short-handed. And so they literally were using some maps from the 19th century. So, map librarians were crucial to that section. The topographic models section did basic research to produce large 3D models that were used for both strategic and operational planning. These are usually quite large, and you could look at it and you could get for people who weren't really map savvy, they could get a sense of the terrain and what it was like. Okay. Spatial photography was engaged primarily in extending the use of those topographic models by creating black and white and color reproductions on which the daily situation could be recorded. The majority of that section's work was for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Most of the work in the map division was top secret, and some maps were not declassified until the 75th anniversary of OSS in 2016. So they were classified that entire time, which makes it a lot of fun trying to look up, find the people and find the maps, because they didn't talk about it. Okay. The agency also produced the President's Globe. Actually, there was more than one globe, but these were 50-inch in diameter globes. One was given to FDR, one was given to Winston Churchill, and there were some others. And the Library of Congress, at least the last I was there, had one of these sitting on the floor. Okay. Now, so far, you might be wondering, I've said nothing about women. At the beginning, there weren't any. But at this time, men were being drafted. And map making, which strikes me as odd, wasn't considered a vital job that was exempt from the draft. So they could draft all of the drafts in bed. But this created a shortage of a shortage of cartographers who could make the maps. The personnel in the map divisions of all government mapping agencies, not just OSS, but also the Army Map Service, the Tennessee Valley Authority, as well as the newly formed OSS. There weren't many people, male or female, with the necessary skills to make the millions of maps that were needed for the war. Training programs had to be instituted. And one of these was the ESMWT, the Engineering Science Management Wartime Training Program. This was one of the largest. The program was actually begun in 1940 when it was realized that this potential conflict that was looming on the horizon would require more engineers than were available or that could be produced through normal college and university classes. So on October 9th, 1940, a bill authorizing the Engineering Defense Training Program was proposed, and it was quickly passed by Congress and signed by FDR. Over the next couple of years, the program was revised and renamed to include not only engineering, and cartography fell under that category, but also chemistry, physics, and other courses, and management. From its inception until June 1945, 215 colleges and universities participated in the program with 13,000 courses and enrolling nearly 600,000 students. In 1942, Marion Armstrong, who we see here, was completing her BA degree in education at Potsdam College in New York. She was majoring in education, but she also had an interest in geography. And so one of her instructors suggested that she might look into the new ESMWT program that was being offered in the Geography Graduate Program at Clark University in Worcester, Mass. The 12-week summer course, which was instituted in 42 at Clark, included, I have a list of all these, I can't remember them all, the geography of war zones, military meteorology, topography and war strategy, cartography, map interpretation, strategic materials, productive capacity, food production, raw materials, interpretation of aerial photographs, coastal features, and conference plans for research, which is a kind of a definitely mixed bag, but obviously a lot of cartography. There were 17 students that first summer. 5 of them were women. The courses were given by regular staff, but there were also a number of visiting specialists who discussed their subjects, and there were 2 instructors in cartography who spoke at the school for a week at a time. The 2 visiting ones in 1942 were Arthur Robinson, who, as we've seen, was chief of the cartographics division of OSS, and Richard Eads Harrison, who was the well-known journalistic cartographer, and he demonstrated for these students some of his techniques in the use of color and the airbrush technique. A year later, in 1943, Irwin Royce, who at that time was the author of the only textbook in cartography, visited and spoke to the students. Well, Robinson was especially impressed with 2 of the students, Marion Armstrong and Henry Frieswick, both of whom he tapped for work at the OSS, making Marion the first female cartographer at OSS. 2 of the other 4 women in the first class went into the Military Intelligence Service and the State Department. One went to Time magazine, and the other one, she continued her studies at Clark. The alumni magazine, the Monadnock, for Clark University Geography Department during the war years, listed the numbers of alumni that were in government service, and the OSS was probably the largest number of alumni, and that was for both men and women. And of course, Clark wasn't the only university with the ESMWT. Okay. Marion worked in the topographic models section for a time, and these models were, as I said, 3-dimensional plaster models of places of concern, places like where they were going to be for D-Day, for instance. The group did their work on the 3rd floor of this building, the historic Ford's Theater, the site of Lincoln's assassination, and at the time, obviously not being used as a theater. This map of Sicily, and I'll show you another part of it here, was to be used by the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a visual aid. And here are the title and legend of it. Another place where the cartographers worked was the National Archives. And this picture shows a group of OSS people sitting on the steps of the archives. Marion is on the left with 2 men who were also cartographers. And the other 2 women, I haven't been able to determine yet if they were also cartographers or if they were office staff, but they were all in that branch. The job was insular in nature because of its top secret character. They couldn't talk about their work to anybody else. And so the employees grew very close because of that. And in fact, they began to be called the matrimony office because so many of the people married colleagues during the war. Marion Armstrong, and we've seen her name as Frieswick there a time or 2. Marion and Henry were among them. They married on April 4th, 1943, and the wedding guests were all OSS colleagues. After the war, Truman disbanded the OSS. That was in 1945. And the cartography jobs were transferred to the State Department for a while. But in 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency was established, and Marion and Henry both went to work there. Henry eventually became head of the cartography section, but Marion resigned in 1952 because Henry was sent to Europe on a rotation, and she wasn't. And so, since they were married, she quit so that she could join him there. Henry remained until his retirement in 1980, and he passed away in 1997. In 2016, the 75th anniversary of OSS, the organization was honored by Congress with a Congressional Gold Medal that we see here. 20 former members of the 100-plus living members of the organization's original 13,000 attended the ceremony, including 96-year-old Marion. To honor her 100th birthday, the Virginia House of Delegates, she lived in Virginia, voted a commendation for the occasion of her 100th birthday. Marion wasn't the only female cartographer at the OSS. And for many, in fact, probably most of the women that I have found so far, I have a name. And perhaps it says cartographer. It's a challenge. But as I noted at the beginning of this paper, Marion has become the face of the OSS. It was Marion back in the 40s. And so I thank you, and I am also doing a shout out, although she's not here, to Marion's daughter, Susan Frieswijk, for all of her help in answering my questions. Thank you.